They say that reality is a thin veil. We walk through our lives thinking the world is solid, predictable, and safe. We trust our eyes, our touch, and our memories. But sometimes the veil slips. Sometimes you see something that shouldn't exist. A person who disappears in mid-sentence. A door that leads to a room that wasn't there yesterday. Or a sound in the middle of the night that sounds exactly like your own voice, call from the basement. Tonight, we have curated a collection of the most unsettling, unexplainable, and bone-chilling stories ever shared on the dark corners of the internet. These aren't just stories, they are warnings. They are glitches in the matrix that suggest our world is much more fragile than we dare to believe. Turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and whatever you do, don't look behind you. Let's begin. They say that the human brain is hardwired to find patterns. We see faces in the clouds. We hear melodies in the wind. It is a survival mechanism, a way to make sense of a chaotic universe. But what happens when the pattern you find isn't a mistake? What happens when the pattern is intentional? My name is Elias, and I used to be an acoustic engineer. My job was to design dead room spaces so perfectly soundproofed that they could absorb even the slightest vibration. I worked for high-end clients, billionaires who wanted total isolation. Research labs studying the effects of sensory deprivation, and occasionally government agencies with very little to explain. I thought I understood silence. I thought I knew the difference between quiet and nothing. I was wrong. It began during the construction of the Void Project. It was a subterranean facility located 300 feet below the surface of the Nevada desert. The client was anonymous, but the budget was astronomical. They wanted a chamber, sphere of pure, absolute silence where no sound from the outside world could penetrate. No seismic shifts, no tectonic groans. No, if the microscopic hum of the Earth's magnetic field. I spent 18 months designing the geometry of this room. I used non-Euclidean mathematics to ensure that any sound wave entering the chamber would be trapped in an infinite loop of reflection and absorption until it simply died. The day we finished the sphere, the air felt heavy. We entered the chamber for the final calibration. As the massive, lead-lined door hissed shut, the world didn't just go quiet. It went dead. It was a sensation I can only describe as a physical blow. Usually, even in a soundproof room, you hear your own body. You hear the rush of blood in your ears. You hear the thud of your heart. You hear the grinding of your joints. But in the void, those sounds were gone. It was as if my body had been disconnected from the laws of physics. I stood there, staring at my colleague, Marcus. He was looking at his handheld decibel meter. The screen read 0.00 dB. Low quiet, 0. Absolute 0. "It's too perfect," Marcus whispered. But his whisper didn't reach me. I saw his lips move, but the sound was swallowed by the air before it could leave his mouth. We were standing in a vacuum of sound. We left the chamber, shaken, and went back to the surface. But the silence followed me. It ate it small. I would be sitting in my office, and, for a split second, the world would glitch. The hum of the air conditioner would vanish, replaced by a void so profound it felt like my ears were bleeding. I thought it was tinnitus, a side effect of the pressure changes in the desert. But then, the patterns emerged. I began to hear things that shouldn't exist in a world of sound. It wasn't noise, it was information. In the middle of the night, while lying in my silent apartment, I would hear a rhythmic tapping. It wasn't coming from the walls or the floor. It was coming from the space between my thoughts. Tap, 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 tap. It was a code, a sequence. I spent weeks trying to decipher it using frequency analysis software. I recorded the silence of my room, hoping to catch the ghost in the machine. When I finally ran the audio through the spectrum analyzer, my heart stopped. The silence wasn't empty. It was filled with a massive low-frequency signal that looked like a mountain range of the screen. It was a waveform so complex, so dense, that it shouldn't have been possible to transmit via air or bone conduction. And then I realized the terrifying truth. The signal wasn't being recorded by my microphone. The signal was the recording. The silence itself was a medium. I became obsessed. I stopped eating. I stopped sleeping. I spent all my time in my lab, trying to tune myself to the frequency. I began to realize that the Void Project hadn't been designed to create silence. It had been designed to create a receiver. The sphere wasn't a room. It was an ear. And something on the other side was finally listening. The patterns became more aggressive. I would be walking down a crowded street, and suddenly the entire world would mute. The cars, the shouting pedestrians, the sirens, all of it would vanish into a sudden, crushing vacuum. In those moments of silence, I could hear him. He didn't have a name, but he had a presence. He was a voice that existed in the gaps between words. He didn't speak to me. He spoke through me. He showed me images of a universe that wasn't made of matter, but of vibration. I saw galaxies that were nothing more than massive swirling chords of music. I saw stars that were dying notes. And I saw the great silence, inevitable end where all vibrations cease and the universe returns to the void. I realized that our reality is just a thin, noisy veil draped over an infinite silent ocean. We are the static. We are the interference. And the architects, the things that live in the silence, are coming to turn off the noise. The final descent happened on a Tuesday. I was back at the Nevada facility, driven by a compulsion I couldn't resist. I needed to go back into the sphere. I needed to hear the end of the song. I entered the chamber alone. I didn't bring Marcus. I didn't bring my equipment. I just brought myself. As the door closed, I didn't feel fear. I felt a sense of homecoming. The silence rushed in, not as an absence of sound, but as a presence of something ancient and overwhelming. The heartbeat started. Thump, thump, thump. But it wasn't coming from the room. It was coming from the walls themselves. The lead, the concrete, the very atoms of the sphere were vibrating in unison. I looked at my hands. They were blurring. My fingers were losing their edges, turning into streaks of gray light, like a long exposure photograph. I wasn't dying. I was being unmade. I was being translated from matter into frequency. In my final moments of physical existence, the voice finally became clear. It wasn't a whisper or a roar. It was a single perfect note. A note so pure that it contained every sound that had ever been made and every sound that would ever be. As the note reached its crescendo, I saw the truth. The universe isn't expanding, it is being played, and we are just the echoes of a song that has already ended. The door to the sphere is still there, the facility is still there, but if you go down there, and you sit in the silence long enough, you might hear it too. you might hear the note. And once you hear it, you can never, ever go back to the noise. We just witnessed the breakdown of space. But what happens when reality breaks down within you? What happens when your own body becomes a stranger? Our next story takes us into the terrifying territory of the flesh. This is the second skinned. Have you ever had that feeling? That sudden, inexplicable sensation that something is off? Not a bad feeling, not a sense of danger, but just a subtle misalignment, like a tooth that's slightly out of place, or a picture frame hanging a fraction of an inch crooked. Most people dismiss it. They call it a trick of the light or a momentary lapse in focus. But for me, that feeling didn't go away. It became my entire life. It started with a small patch on my left forearm. I'm a person who takes care of myself. I notice everything about my body. So when I saw that dry, slightly discolored patch of skin, I thought nothing of it. I assumed it was eczema, or perhaps just a bit of sun damage from a summer spent outdoors. I applied some moisturizer, waited a few days, and expected it to fade. It didn't fade. It grew. Within a week, the patch had expanded from the size of a coin to the size of my palm. But it wasn't just larger. The texture had changed. It no longer felt like skin. It felt synthetic. If I ran my thumb over it, it felt like polished silicone, or perhaps a very fine, expensive leather. It was unnaturally smooth, devoid of the tiny pores and fine hairs that cover every other inch of my body. I went to a dermatologist. I remember sitting in that sterile white office, feeling a strange sense of detachment as he examined my arm. He poked at it with a gloved finger, his brow furrowed in confusion. "It's unusual," he said, his voice clinical and distant. "There's no inflammation, no redness, no sign of infection." But the cellular structure, it doesn't look like human tissue under the dermatoscope. It looks almost manufactured. He prescribed a high-strength steroid cream and told me to come back in 2 weeks. I left that office feeling a cold knot of dread tightening in my stomach. It wasn't the medical uncertainty that scared me. It was the word he used, manufactured. I went home and sat in front of the mirror. I stared at my arm for hours. As I watched, I saw something that defied every law of biology I knew. The edge of the patch border where the normal skin met the synthetic texture wasn't a static line. It was move. It was slowly, imperceptibly creeping upward toward my elbow. It wasn't growing like a rash. It was replacing me. The next few days were a descent into a private, silent madness. The patch spread to my shoulder, then my neck, and then the most terrifying part began. I lost sensation. I could touch the patch, but I couldn't feel it. It was as if my nervous system had simply stopped acknowledging that part of my body existed. I would tap my arm with a pen, and while I could see the skin indent, there was no signal sent to my brain. I was becoming a stranger to my own anatomy. I stopped going to work. I stopped answering the phone. My world shrunk to the size of my apartment and the reflection in my bathroom mirror. I became obsessed with the transformation. I spent hours documenting it, take photos every hour, watching the new me emerge from the old. The texture was changing again. It was no longer just smooth, it was becoming translucent. I could see through the skin of my shoulder, but I didn't see muscle or bone. Instead, I saw a shimmering, iridescent lattice of silver filaments. They looked like fiber optic cables. pulsing with a faint rhythmic light. I realized then that this wasn't a disease. It wasn't an infection. It was an upgrade. The psychological toll was immense. I felt like a passenger in a vehicle that was being rebuilt while I was still driving it. I would wake up in the middle of the night gasping, convinced that my limbs were no longer mine. I would reach out to touch my face, only to feel something hard and cold where my cheek should be. Then came the night of the peel. I had been sleeping fitfully, caught in a fever dream of shifting geometries and silent screams. I woke up feeling an intense, crushing pressure, as if someone were trying to squeeze the very life out of me. My skin felt tight, impossibly tight, as if it were 2 sizes too small for my body. I struggled to sit up, but my movements were stiff and mechanical. I felt like a marionette being pulled by invisible strings. I crawled toward the bathroom, my breath coming in ragged, shallow gasp. When I reached the mirror and turned on the light, I didn't scream. I couldn't. My throat felt as though it had been lined with glass. In the mirror, I saw a monster. Or perhaps I saw a masterpiece. The human skin, soft, flawed, imperfect skin I had lived in for 30 years, was hanging off my body in large, ragged strips. It looked like a discarded costume, a wet gray shroud that was slowly sliding toward the floor. And underneath was something magnificent. I was no longer made of flesh and blood. My torso was a sculpted shell of pearlescent obsidian-like material. My arms were elegant, elongated structures of glowing silver filaments. My eyes were no longer organic spheres. They were twin voids of pure, swirling light. I reached up to touch my face, expect to feel the terrifying smoothness of this new form. But as my fingers, now long tapering needles of light, made contact with the remaining scraps of my human skin, something happened. The old skin didn't just fall away, it dissolved. It turned into a fine gray ash that drifted through the air like snow, and as it vanished, I felt a sudden, violent surge of consciousness. Every sensation in the room, hum of the light bulb, the vibration of a car passing outside, the very movement of the air, hit me with the force of a tidal wave. I wasn't just seeing the world, I was processing it. I could see the electromagnetic fields of the electronics in my apartment. I could hear the microscopic friction of the dust mote dancing in the light. I was no longer a biological entity. I was a sensory engine. But with this godlike perception came a devastating realization. I looked into the mirror, searching for allies. I searched for the man who liked coffee, the man who feared the dark, the man who had a mother and a father and a history. But there was no one there. The consciousness that inhabited this new, beautiful form was not mine. It was an occupant, a pilot. The allies part of me, soul, the ego, the messy, emotional human part, had been discarded along with the skin. I was just the software running on a brand new piece of hardware. I am sitting here now, in the dark, watching the last of my human skin turn to ash on the bathroom floor. I can feel the city around me, millions of heartbeats, the billions of electrical impulses, all of it screaming in a language I finally understand. I am not dying, I am being perfected. But as I watch the silver light pulse beneath my new skin, I realize that perfection is the loneliest thing in the universe. Because once you are perfect, there is no room left for anything else. The horror isn't always internal. Sometimes it's standing right in the corner of your eye, waiting for you to notice. Prepare yourself for a descent into paranoia. This is The Static Man. Have you ever had that feeling of being watched? Note the prickle of your neck when someone walks behind you in a grocery store? But something deeper. A sense that the very air around you is heavy with an invisible gaze. Most people call it paranoia. They tell you to check the locks, turn all the lights, and get some sleep. But what do you do when the thing watching you isn't a person? What do you do when the watcher doesn't even belong to this reality? It's started with the peripheral vision. I'm a freelance graphic designer. I spend most of my time in front of dual monitors, working in a dimly lit studio apartment. It's a solitary life, and solitude breeds certain habits. You start to notice the small things, way the shadows stretch at point PM, the specific rhythm of the radiator clicking. But then, I started seeing him. It would happen while I was deep in a project. I'd be focused on a pixel-perfect line, and suddenly, out of the corner of my eye, there would be a flicker, a movement in the corner of the room. It wasn't a shadow. It was too structured for that. It looked like a smudge of gray static, a momentary glitch in the visual field. I'd whip my head around, heart hammering against my ribs, and nothing. Just my empty studio, my half-empty coffee mug, the stack of books on my desk. Eye strain, I told myself. Too much blue light, too many hours staring at a screen. I bought blue light glasses. I took breaks every 20 minutes. I even started doing eye exercises. But the Static Man didn't care about my corrective measures. He was getting closer. The first time I saw him clearly, I wasn't in my studio. I was driving home on a deserted stretch of highway. The moon was high, casting long, skeletal shadows across the road. I glanced in my rearview mirror to check my blind spot, and my breath hitched in my throat. He was sitting in my back seat. He wasn't a man. Not really. He was a silhouette made entirely of television static, flickering, buzzing mass of gray and white noise. He had no face, no clothes, no features. Just a shape that seemed to vibrate at a frequency that made my teeth ache. I slammed on the brakes, nearly spinning out into the ditch. I spun around, my heart thundering in my ears, ready to fight, ready to scream. The back seat was empty, just my gym bag and an old discarded jacket. I sat there for 10 minutes, hands trembling on the steering wheel, staring at the empty seat. I laughed, dry, hysterical sound. Sleep deprivation, I whispered. It's just sleep deprivation. But the laughter died in my throat when I looked at the rear-view mirror again. For a fraction of a second, he was there. He wasn't sitting. He was leaning forward, his static-filled head hovering just inches from my shoulder. And as he moved, I heard it. A sound like 1,000 radio stations being tuned at once. A chaotic, electronic screech that felt like it was being played directly inside my brain. I didn't drive home. I drove to a 24-hour diner, sat in a bright booth under fluorescent lights, and waited for the sun to come up. I thought the light would protect me. I thought the presence of other people would anchor me back to reality. I was wrong. The Static Man doesn't need darkness. He only needs your attention. As the days passed, the glitches became more frequent and more physical. It wasn't just my vision anymore. I started hearing the hum. A low-frequency, electronic drone that seemed to follow me from room to room. It was the sound of a dead channel. And then, the objects began to change. I would leave my keys at the kitchen counter, and when I turned back, they would be vibrating. Not move, but vibrating so fast They became a blur. I'd look at my television, and for a split second, the screen wouldn't show a picture, but a window into somewhere else. A place of gray skies and jagged, geometric landscapes. The paranoia turned into a full-blown obsession. I stopped leaving my apartment. I felt that if I stayed in the light, if I kept my eyes fixed on something solid, he couldn't manifest. But he was patient. He was a predator of perception. Last night, the isolation finally broke me. I was sitting at my desk, staring at a blank canvas, trying to force my brain back into a creative state. The room was silent, save for the hum of my computer. Then the hum changed. It became rhythmic. Bzz, 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 bzz. I felt a sudden intense coldness on the back of my neck. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. My muscles felt locked, as if they were being held in place by an invisible force. Slowly, agonizingly, I forced myself to look at the reflection in my darkened monitor. He was standing directly behind my chair. He wasn't just a smudge of static anymore. He was becoming defined. The gray noise was coalesced into a shape. A tall, spindly figure with elongated limbs that looked like they were made of jagged lightning. He had no eyes, but I could feel his gaze. It was a heavy, crushing weight that seemed to be pulling the very atoms of my body apart. He reached out. A hand, flickering, trembling claw of gray pixels, descended toward my head. I closed my eyes tight. I squeezed them shut so hard I saw stars. "It's not real," I chanted. "It's a hallucination. It's an illusion." But then I felt it. A touch. A physical touch, but a sensation of interference. It felt like my skin was being hit by a million tiny electric needles. My entire body began to vibrate in sync with his frequency. I felt my very identity, my memories, my name, my sense of self begin to fragment, like a corrupted file being deleted from a hard drive. I screamed, but the sound that came out wasn't mine. It was a burst of white noise, a digital shriek that tore through the silence of the apartment. I lunged away from the desk, crashing to the floor. I scrambled toward the door, my hands clawing at the wood, my breath coming in jagged, electronic gasps. I burst out into the hallway and ran. I didn't stop until I reached the street, under the harsh, unforgiving glare of the streetlights. I stood there, shivering, watching the sunrise. The world looked normal. The cars were moved. The birds were chirping. Everything was solid. But as I walked back into my apartment, exhausted and broken, I looked at my hands. They weren't shaking anymore. They were flickering. For a split second, my fingers became translucent, turning into a blur of gray pixels before snapping back to flesh. We have seen the skin fail. We have seen the shadows move. But what if all of it, every fear, every glitch, every scream, is just a line of code in a dying program? It's time for our final descent. This is the art. We like to believe that our lives are written in stone. We believe that our memories are sacred, our history is solid, and our existence is a continuous, unbroken line from birth to death. We think we are the authors of our own stories. But what if we are nothing more than entries in a ledger? What if our entire reality is just a massive, sprawling archive, and someone or something has just decided to hit delete? My name is Julian, and I am a digital forensics specialist. My job is to go where others cannot. When a hard drive is crushed, when a server farm is destroyed, When data is corrupted beyond recognition, people call me. I recover the lost. I piece together the shattered fragments of digital lives. I am a ghost hunter for the information age. I have seen things that would break a normal person's mind. I have recovered video files from deep-sea wreckage that showed things that shouldn't exist. I have reconstructed chat logs from dead websites that seemed to be communicating with people who hadn't been born yet. But nothing in my 15 years of experience prepared me for the package that arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. It was a plain, unmarked cardboard box. No return address, no shipping manifest. Inside, nestled in layers of anti-static foam, was a single ancient-looking USB drive. It wasn't deemed plastic. It felt like it was made of something heavy, cold, and slightly organic, like polished bone. I should have turned it down. My protocols are strict. No unknown media, no unverified sources. But there was a pull, strange magnetic curiosity that bypassed my professional judgment. I brought it to my workstation, the one in my basement lab that is completely air-gapped from the internet. The sanctuary, I called it. I plugged it in. The drive didn't show up as a standard mass storage device. My computer struggled for a moment, the fan spinning at maximum velocity, the processor screaming under an invisible load. Then, a single file appeared on my desktop. It was a video file. It had no extension, no name, just a string of zeros. 000000.dat. I clicked play. The footage was grainy, black and white, looking like a low bitrate recording from the late 90s. It showed a hallway, a long, narrow, dimly lit hallway with beige wallpaper and a flickering fluorescent light at the far end. It was a mundane, boring set. But as I watched, I noticed something. The camera wasn't moved on a tripod or being held by a person. It was floating. It moved with a smooth, predatory grace, gliding through the hallway as if it were part of the air itself. I leaned closer to the screen. As the camera turned a corner into a small, cluttered office, I felt a cold spike of recognition hit my chest. The desk in the video, the coffee mug with the chipped handle, the specific way the sunlight hit the dust motes in the air. It was my office, my sanctuary. I froze. My heart began to hammer against my ribs like a trapped bird. I looked around my actual room. Everything was exactly as it should be. But on the screen, the camera was moved through my space in real time. I watched the digital version of my desk. I saw the digital version of my hands resting on my keyboard. I saw the digital version of my face, illuminated by the glow of the monitor. The video wasn't a recording of the past. It was a live feed of the now. Then, the glitch happened. In the video, something entered the frame. It didn't walk through the door. It simply manifested. It was a figure, tall and impossibly thin, composed entirely of shifting geometric shadows. It looked like a tear in the fabric of the video itself, whole in reality, shaped like a man. The shadow figure moved toward the digital version of me. I watched, paralyzed by a terror so profound it felt like my blood had turned to lead. As the figure reached out a hand toward my digital head, at that exact moment, I felt a sensation in my actual room, a sudden sharp drop in temperature, and then a touch. It wasn't a physical touch. It was a sensation of data. It felt like 1,000,000 tiny electric pulses were being injected directly into my skull. My vision blurred. The edges of my monitor began to fray, turning into streaks of gray static, same static I had seen in the other stories, the same static that had been haunting the world. I scrambled back from the desk, knocking over my chair. I ran for the door, but as I reached for the handle, I realized something horrifying. The door wasn't there. Where the exit to my basement should have been, there was only a flat gray surface, a wall of unrendered texture. I ran to the window, but the view of the garden was gone. In its place was a vast, infinite void of blackness, filled with scrolling lines of green code. I wasn't in my basement anymore. I wasn't even on Earth. I was inside the archive. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. Everything, trees, the oceans, the stars, the people, the very concept of Tay, it was all just data. A massive, complex simulation running on a scale we could never comprehend. And I had just stumbled upon the source code. I looked back at my workstation. The monitor was no longer showing a video. It was showing a command prompt. A single line of text was blinking in the darkness. Critical error. Unknown entity detected in Sector 7 Jaj. Initiating system cleanup deleting file. Humanity 01. The shadow figure appeared in my room. It wasn't a ghost or a demon. It was a system administrator, a cosmic janitor sent to scrub the error from the record. It moved toward me, and as it approached, I felt myself beginning to fragment. My memories, my first kiss, the smell of rain, the face of my mother. They were being stripped away, converted into strings of ones and zeros, and sucked into the void. I wasn't dying. I was being uninstalled. I tried to scream, but my voice was just a burst of white noise. I tried to fight, but my limbs were nothing more than flickering pixels. In my final moments of consciousness, I saw the truth. The universe isn't a place. It's a program. And the program is reaching its end-of-life cycle. The last thing I saw before the darkness took me was a single blinking cursor in the center of my vision. System shut down. The stories are over, but the feeling? That feeling stays with you. If you felt even a flicker of dread during this journey, it means you're paying attention. And in a world like this, paying attention is the only way to survive. If you enjoyed this compilation, please hit the like button. It helps the algorithm find other seekers of the truth. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next descent into the unknown. And now, I have a question for you. Have you ever experienced a glitch in your own reality? A moment where the world just stopped to make sense? Tell us your story in the comment below. We read every single one, and we might just feature your experience in our next video. Until next time, stay vigilant. And remember, don't trust the silence.